Your engagement helps make this show what it is, so definitely don't be shy. But I want to go to our guests. We have the one and only Mark Frost. He's an economist, professor, consultant, drummer, Eagle Scout, Marine, capitalist, Schumpeterian, and recovering libertarian. Mark, what's going on, my man? You got your coffee with you?
Yes.
I have my Mountain Dew.
Oh, you got your Mountain Dew this morning.
Mountain Dew.
It's still caffeine. That's one of them.
That's
But
cool.
Mark, speaking of celebrity powers, let's talk about Jerome Powell. I don't know, that's a hard segue.
Well, he's a celebrity.
He's a celebrity of sorts.
In geek DC world.
Yeah, right. So an interesting item came out where
He's
Jerome...
a celebrity, and yeah, technically.
Yeah, technically. Right. That was the best I had. I was trying to pull it away from the UFO subject. People were like, oh my God, get away from the subject.
His signature is on money.
Yeah, right.
So, that's pretty celebrity.
That's pretty celebrity. There was a comment that he made basically where they were asking him about inflation. And he was talking about the Fed's powers. But he basically said, look, I don't have any power to do anything about oil or gas, meaning I can't really do anything about these inflationary pressures. We don't necessarily have the tools to do anything about it. And what I realized was, so two things are true at once, and both of them are disastrous. A, the policies that he's taken in order to try to cut inflation to the degree that he can, meaning to mitigate it, will adversely affect economic impact and, by definition, jobs and job production. So there's that. On the other side of that, he's basically saying, but I really can't do anything about the inflationary pressures in general. So A, you're going to have an economic impact of trying to mitigate it to the degree that you can, which will have an effect on jobs and productivity. By the same token, you acknowledge that you really can't do anything about it in earnest. That seems horrible. Like, am I wrong in that assessment? Like, what am I missing here?
No, you're not really wrong. I mean, just like when the Fed is trying to expand money, and we have quantitative easing, well, when the Fed wants to destroy money, that is when the Fed wants to cool the economy off instead of heat it up, which is what it wants to do right now, then we have quantitative tightening, where the Fed slowly but surely just starts tightening up money, meaning that they're taking money out of circulation, making money less abundant, more scarce, if you will, which drives up the purchasing power of money. So to the extent that they are going to do that, then that's something to fight against inflation. What they don't usually say on the brochure is when you fight inflation, you purposely put the economy into a recession. You guys had me on, I think it was a year ago, and we were talking about China, and I said, what China's doing is a controlled burn. They're purposely putting their economy into a recession because they're planning this out. And so that's what the Fed does when they fight inflation. The way they fight inflation is they drive interest rates up so high that it chokes off private investment. And another phrase for that is called unemployment. People seeking jobs, and there are jobs available. And that's where we're headed. We're headed into a stagflationary economy that is, I don't see how it's going to last anything less than about 5 years.
Wow.
And
because you told me that you were getting bearish basically on the dollar, that like this was something that was of severe concern to you. Explain why.
Well, it really goes back even to to the Trump administration. One of the things I didn't approve of that Trump was into was the tariffs. I understood why he was doing them, and there was a political symbolism to it, certainly. But from an economic perspective, all it was a tax on Americans. And so any time that you have the dollar falling, that means that other currencies are strengthening relative to the dollar. That means that that people who hold American money, that is Americans, certainly, everything that they buy that's imported now costs more money in both nominal terms as well as purchasing power. And that's a tax on people. And again, if you're making $300,000 a year, there's all sorts of things that you can be doing that at least helps mitigate. But if you're making $30,000 a year, this is a really bad thing. Not only is the money that you buy things with, is that diluted, and it doesn't have as much purchasing power as it used to, but also the things that you have to buy to function in society, gasoline, heating oil, food, those have all skyrocketed from a real price perspective, along the lines of 100% doubling right now along those particular goods. And folks that are on fixed income or low income, where there's not a lot left over in what we economists call disposable income, the low disposable income people, people that we say have a high marginal propensity to consume, they're the ones that are going to pay this tax, and they're the ones that are going to suffer the most from this self-imposed economic suicide that we've been on. And it's sad to me because none of this needed to happen.
Mark, you got a question here from one of the people in the Rumble room. They're asking you about the role that futures play in pricing of goods, and that this, is really just allowing the rich people to buy futures and commodities and driving up prices. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, yes, futures markets are really what drive markets, because in one word, economics is about studying expectations. And so as people's expectations change, then that changes market expectations, and then that can change things all along. So the futures market really measures how people are voting with their own money. And so you can look at the futures market and see if what people are betting for and what they're betting against. Mm-hmm. And markets are nervous right now. That's pretty obvious. And the strange war, and then NATO, when I said it was self-imposed, part of that is including this war that's going on. It seems to me completely that our economic problems are self-imposed, and we just keep printing more money and more money. We keep spending more money and more money. We keep poking the bear. If you think a country is paranoid because, we said psych back in 1990 when we said, oh, don't worry, the Eastern European countries aren't going to be NATO. Don't worry about it. Not going to happen. If you think somebody maybe got paranoid because of that promise not being filled, now look at fast-track status for countries that were always said would never be part of NATO, including Ukraine. Mm-hmm. And so if somebody is worried about NATO, I think that they're more worried about NATO today than they were last week.
Yeah.
And so not even just my area, which is economics, just when you step into international political economy, the people running the United States engine, if you will, let's just call it an engine, seem to be incompetent. They seem to not understand how an engine works, what it needs, what kind of maintenance it needs, and all this sort of stuff. But they're either incompetent or they have some nefarious grand scheme that they're trying to do, and I'm more of the belief that they're just incompetent.
Yeah. Mark, there was something you mentioned before I gave you the question from the Rumble room. You said something about, countries doing what they have to do to survive, right? And one of those countries doing what they have to do to survive is Brazil. And right now, under Jair Bolsonaro, we know that Brazil has not joined in with the U.S. in writing out some sanctions and supporting what the U.S. is doing. However, Jair Bolsonaro has gone to the WTO to ask for an exemption on fertilizer because the western part of Brazilian states, all along the western side of Brazil, soybeans are their main, export. And he says that his economy will be decimated if the soybean farmers can't get fertilizer. Meanwhile, they would be in violation of sanctions because of what the U.S. and NATO and the EU have all imposed, and all these different, working groups, these contractual agreements that these countries have agreed to, they're asking for a WTO exemption to this. Is that something the WTO needs to start weighing in on in order to make sure that we don't have as bad of a shortage? I think there is going to be food shortages, but to soften the blow to the rest of the world, start weighing in and making these exemptions and exceptions.
I don't know if the WTO should be the institution that does it, because to be honest, they're pretty weak. In all honesty, the WTO is going to do whatever the United States wants the WTO to do, with some obligatory dissent along the way. I mean, the truth of the fertilizer thing is that when I said that I think this administration is just incompetent in any warfare, whether it's a physical warfare, whether it is a political maneuvering, whether it's psyops, whatever it is, you have to anticipate your opponent's moves, and you have to have a solution by which you're happy and your opponent's happy within that solution. And this administration just seems to be, they seem to be incredibly naive, like they're 14 years old.
Do you think it's naive or hubris?
About Biden, I mean, you would think, the gray hair would be in there, and there would be some, something that says, okay, this doesn't make sense, that doesn't make sense, and this doesn't make sense.
But Mark, do you think that's naivety or hubris?
Since I've been a president, it has made sense. Nothing. I mean, I'm trying to think of one major policy that he's done that I thought, oh yeah, that's going to help. That's going to help people.
Mark, do you think this is an issue of naivety or hubris? I tend to think it's hubris, meaning this kind of expectation where you've dominated the world for so long that you just believe that anything that you do is just going to magically turn out correct, when you're basically hitting your head on reality. Like, for example, I often use an analogy for chess. It's like I've been playing for so long where I just assume that when I move a piece, it's going to be the best move, or that when I move a piece, that it's not going to get taken because there's nothing there going to do it. And after you play for a very long time, that stuff becomes almost feel like it's magic. Like you just are there and you just do it. And the reality of it is, it's not really magic. You've been doing it for so long that you've gotten accustomed to it, and the moment that you stop, your ability to do it goes away. There may be a certain hubris to go to a tournament after not playing for God knows how long, but the reality is you get crushed. And I'm wondering if that's something similar here. It's like, oh, we won. The Soviet Union has basically fallen. We've taken the world in this kind of unipolar way. And so when you're engaging other countries, you're not engaging those countries as if they're sovereign powers, or if those countries have an autonomy and a sovereignty of their own. You're engaging them as if they're conquered, or as if that you have some kind of, moral or cosmic standing to be above them in some particular fashion. And when they don't accept that, or you got to deal with the reality of events. And it seems that, how do you view that? I view it as an issue of hubris.
It's kind of like either the bully syndrome, or the spoiled rich kid syndrome.
Right.
Right.
It's like, which one is it? It's looking similar.
It's like at this point, you grew up in wealth, in such great wealth. Maybe your parents struggled.
Yeah.
But Hunter Biden, prime example.
Yeah.
Joe Biden talks about his humble beginnings as a kid. That might be fine. But he has struck gold in his career. And then his children did not experience that suffering and working class life that Joe Biden did as a kid.
Not in the least.
And, at some point, everything is taken for granted.
True. And actually, I think that in this context that hubris and naive mean the same thing.
Yeah.
In the political realm, to be this naive, you have to be full of hubris. You have to be so full of it that you think, I don't even have to bother with wondering if there's something else, because the only thing that matters is what is.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe it's the same thing.
Let me ask you this, BRICS. Let's talk about that for a moment. Oh, I'm sorry. Please finish.
I'm sorry, what?
Well, no, please finish. I thought there was a lag in regards to the comment, and I thought you were finished this thought. I'm sorry.
Just going to say, no actual practicing economist out there. I don't mean talking head, but all of the people actually doing economics all of us are just befuddled. We're like, we don't understand completely what they're doing. Even if you say, okay, it's on the nefarious, this is what they're trying to do. Well, some of their policies actually undermine their other policies. It's kind of weird. So
it is super weird. I agree with you on that front. Let's go to BRICS. So BRICS it's almost like this other part of the world economy. You have Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. These are upcoming economies. They basically cobble together to deal with their own cooperation in regards to their own needs or the unique needs. So there are two other countries that are basically petitioning to join, Iran and Argentina. What should we expect from this joining of the countries to the BRICS? And all of these guys are going to meet at the G20 summit coming up shortly. It's almost as if you have two sides of the global economies, where you have the BRICS economies and you have, let's say, like the G7. It seems, though, that the BRICS economies are gaining far more, clout, leverage, weight in our economic world. I mean, even so much so as the West couldn't have the ability or didn't have the ability to just destroy the Russian economy by itself. Meaning all of them cobbling together didn't have the economic power necessary to destroy the Russian economy in a way that they wanted to with their sanctions. Is it a situation where the BRICS economies are just becoming, let's say, having more clout to such a degree that the Western economies are basically losing out in their capacities to dictate terms to the rest of the world?
I'd have to think harder on that to know whether I agree with you or not agree with you on that. But one thing is for certain, this administration engages these economies very different than the Trump administration tended to engage them.
Explain.
My problems with Trump almost always deal with his personality. I just like Trump's personality.
Sure.
It's on a chalkboard. But his policies, what he actually did as president, official things he did as president of the United States, actually were pretty good policies with respect to promoting kind of a widespread growth through all sectors of the economy. And he did it internationally by treating so-called developing countries not as developing countries, but as friends. And they felt much more respected and like they had much more to gain in Trump's America. Then Biden gets in, and whether it's the Latina X, whether it's a cult on a pure control, cultural side, or if it's something else, I think it was Bill Maher that said, Democrats never miss an opportunity to miss an opportunity. And that's what it seems like. That seems very true. They've completely blown the opportunity to bring in other countries in our hemisphere against their supposedly critical war against Russia, where we're taking sides and poking the bear, so to speak, which is just ridiculous from my perspective as an American first person. I think that as an American, I want to help other people in the world to the extent that we reasonably can. But my people come first. It's that simple. And I suspect, at least everywhere else I've been, that's how everybody thinks, except this administration. But now we have to start thinking what happens in November, because even if the softest response happens, they're going to lose both houses of Congress. So they'll have the White House, but they're not going to have Congress anymore. And what's going to happen in this administration? So you asked me about futures markets earlier, and this is what makes futures markets go random. When you just look at a graph and you say, okay, this thing is a random walk. It's moving in time, but that's about it. The other movements are just random, it seems like. Well, random happens in futures markets when betting becomes so difficult to put a rational pin on it that your best bet is throwing a dart blind. And that's the problem with the economy right now. The futures markets are going nuts. Smart money is seemingly indicating jumping off the ship for the time being. And the smart money always jumps first.
Your point is they can't predict. I mean, if you can't predict, you can't necessarily know where to put your money, so anything becomes somewhat of a wild card.
That makes the market pretty unstable.
Yeah.
And investors don't like that
unpredictability.
Kind of volatility.
Yeah.
Now, staying with BRICS, Mark, China over the past, I would say the last several years, they have really become South America's largest, biggest trading partner. The trade between the LAC, which is Latin America, Caribbean, with China is hovering at about $350 billion annually average. That's on average, right? So obviously China is the big boy on the block in BRICS. It's the second biggest economy in the world. By some metrics, they would say that China is actually the biggest economy. I mean, that's up for debate. However, how would you compare how the BRICS, this economic union, is going to go up against, let's say, the EU, and especially because the EU is basically is the European branch of the U.S. government. So how are they going to compare against the Chinese involvement with BRICS and those emerging economies in South America when you have 18 out of 30, or no, excuse me, I'm thinking of the African Union, actually. There's 18 out of 33 African Union states that are backing the Belt and Road Initiative, I believe. So basically my point is the BRICS countries have the biggest influence over the global South, whereas the U.S. doesn't maintain that hegemony anymore, and the EU, that economic bloc can't possibly stand up to what the Chinese are doing, right?
Well, you're braver than I am. You just said on radio that the EU is just the U.S. and Europe.
I mean, it is.
This is the European branch of America.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, it was a branch of America. So there you go. For the Brit listeners.
Mark, go for it.
Yes, you're exactly right. I mean, whether or not that money that they're spending will pay off, who knows? But it's clear that there's another player in town, and only morons take people the size of China for granted. And, it just goes to show again, we could take a lesson. You can't fight the whole world.
Yeah.
And you also can't expect the whole world to even want exactly U.S.-style capitalism. Right. Lots of countries want another kind of type of capitalism. Other countries want yet a different type. And this attitude that everybody that we do business with and everybody that we call our friend has to be basically little mini-me's of us, I think that's part of the attitude that needs to calm down. World War II is over. We don't have to be that Bretton Woods United States that we were after World War II. We all should be relaxing in the peace dividend. I mean, that's really what should be happening. That's been blown. At some point, we have to quit printing money. I've been an inflation hawk since before the pandemic. And so we can't just change what we print money for and say, oh, well, this is for defense, so don't worry, that won't be inflationary. Yes, it will. If we buy a pencil and we don't pay for it and we print money to buy it, that's inflationary. And I don't support that. And I don't think any American should if the primary goal is trying to take care of America.
Mark, we're going to end it on that. Mark Frost, he's an economist, professor, consultant, drummer, Eagle Scout Marine, capitalist, Jupiterian, and recovering libertarian. You can follow Mark on Twitter at FrostyCash. You guys are listening to Fault Lines. Thomas, Chan, we're coming back. We're going to have a conversation on basically Finland and Sweden being allowed into NATO. NATO expanding by 2 more countries despite not supposed to being budging 1 inch to the east.